All right, everyone. Several articles have been made in the last couple of days about the mysterious Trump approval numbers. More polls have come out in the last few days since I actually talked about this issue, and I pointed out that Trump's approval hadn't really changed as the result of impeachment proceedings. The inquiry, the Ukraine story, the idea of a whistleblower, none of that has really impacted his support. It's still in the low 40s. This, by the way, is not that bad. It's the same roughly as Obama had at the same point in his presidency. It's survivable. It's arguably rising, albeit slowly. And those are all things that are pro-Trump. When you look at these numbers, I would expect he's got a very good chance of re-election. And the reason for this, they're acting confused. Well, here the big question, here are 10 reasons Trump might be impeachment-proof approval-wise. It's very, very simple that you don't have to think about it very much. Number one is the Democrats themselves. The biggest problem the Democrats have are the Democrats, not Trump. Trump's been doing the same thing predictably for several years now. He's not an unknown quantity. They should be able to maneuver around him, but they can't figure out how to get off the ground. They don't understand Trump and how to actually counter him. That's because they keep disagreeing on the methods. Because the Democratic Party is schismatic. You have multiple different groups within it. You have the AOC, Ilhan Omar people, which, by the way, come to the forefront more often than not because they're the most vocal, self-righteous, opportunistic, some would say. I certainly would. You have the Pelosi crowd. They're the ones that are like, well, we know how to raise the money. We know how to do things. Just fucking shut up, sit down, listen to us. We win elections. Arguably true long term, although in the last few they've certainly had some problems. They did an underwhelming job in the House, lost Senate support in the last midterms. That wasn't great for them. They didn't get the blue wave they were expecting. Before that, of course, they lost to Trump in an election that, there was a 99% chance, according to all their corporate allies, that they were going to win. Oh, Hillary Clinton, first female president. Wonderful, by the way, would be a dynastic sellout has-been. By the way, those of you still saying Hillary Clinton is going to run for office, she's just waiting for Biden to get out. I don't think so. I think she's more likely to just back Elizabeth Warren and pass the torch. I think she's hoping for kickbacks. I think she's hoping for significant political kickbacks. Not a VP slot or something. Imagine Secretary of State Hillary Clinton all over again, essentially. It'd be very, very funny. Bubba Bill's been out of politics for a while, so now she gets all the limelight and all of the cash grabbing that the Clintons can possibly do by causing people to accidentally kill themselves by shooting themselves 3 or 4 times or hanging themselves in a cell while the cameras are malfunctioning, things of that nature that people prefer not to talk about. Anyway, with regards to the Trump approval numbers, that's one reason, the Democratic Party. They're leaderless. The leader they do technically have, which is Perez, is powerless. He doesn't like to come out of his shell very often. He's sort of an absentee DNC head at this point, letting other people take the fore, like Hillary Clinton. She's quite visible. For a while, she disappeared. She gave people a reprieve from her presence in order to make her presence more valuable. That was a good strategy. And then you've got AOC, and then you've got Pelosi, who really wants to be Queen Bee. She thinks of herself as the head of the country. She thinks of herself, if I had to guess, as sort of a president in exile sort of character. She wants to be dictator because she's a vapid, horrendous opportunist. I have zero respect, by the way, for the Pelosiites. The only thing they've ever been right on is AOC and her opportunist branch of the party. The only reason that they compete, by the way, is because they both want to be queen. It's basically the dynamic that we see emerging. Another reason is that the impeachment inquiry is bullshit. It's not based on anything. There's no legitimate grievance to be had against Trump for talking to foreign world leaders. It does not matter if he was encouraging the investigation of the son of a so-called political opponent. It doesn't matter. He's talking about the need to investigate possible corruption that had been red flagged. That's all. That's not impeachable. They go, well, here's the caveat. They can impeach him. The House, the Democrats in the House, technically, they have the support, it seems, to proceed with that. But it would be a disaster for them. If they impeach him, his approval will probably rise more. In fact, I think Trump, he sits there chuckling himself to sleep at night, hoping that they actually trigger impeachment. He's hoping to bait them into doing so. He's been doing it the whole time anyway. He learned well from the 1990s. He knows that if he gets impeached, his approval arguably rises because it makes the Democrats look like they're incapable of doing anything other than complaining about him being president. He's not wrong. Name one thing. Here's a challenge for you. Name one thing that the Democrats have put forward, major legislation-wise, in the last 2 years. Major legislation that they've championed, they've fought for, whether successful or unsuccessful, that could change people's lives. One piece of signature legislation. You probably can. The average American can. I'm scraping my brain. I can think of a few things that nobody would care about, and that's only because I literally analyze politics for a fucking living. I do this for hours every single day, and I can barely think of anything that they've pledged themselves towards, none of which I think has been successful. Green New Deal doesn't come to mind. Nobody cares about that. That landed with a thud on the initial rollout, number one. Number two is hyperpartisan. Number three has been unsuccessful at even taking hold among all Democrats. That needs a lot of refinement to actually be the effective strategy that I think the Cortez wanted it to be. There is no legislation. The Democratic legislature has been more do-nothing than Boehner's Congress has. And you saw how they got screwed long-term as the result of that. The Boehnerites got swept aside because all they could do was obstruct. They've had their chance, those same people, to work with Trump. A bunch of never-Trumpers have already been kicked out. More will be kicked out this election. The Republicans might gain Senate. It looks like the Republicans aren't even going to lose significant numbers in the Senate, which is something that I think they've got to defend 2-1. Those races matter. When people look at matchup polls between Trump and these various Democrats, oh, he's 10 points behind every Democrat. Irrelevant. Totally and completely irrelevant. General hasn't begun yet. He doesn't have a single opponent. His approval will definitely rise during the general. That seems to be organic for the most part. He's probably not going to be impeached. If he does, he'll probably gain support anyway. And the other reason is he has a very large, hardened core fan base. People kept talking even during the primaries, before it was even candidate Trump, when he was running as a candidate to even be the candidate to run for the Republican Party, the nominee. Even then they were talking about his supposedly low ceiling of support. That is, the idea that there was a threshold that he couldn't get beyond of people that could possibly find him palatable. That was never the case. I correctly pointed out what he had was a high floor. He just had a very stable one. So something like 20-25% of the Republicans became diehard supporters very early, and they stuck with him throughout all of it. That fan base has grown. His approval within the GOP is massive. His approval among partisan Republicans is beyond Reagan levels. Astronomical amounts of in-party support. He has the most hardened support base of any modern president easily, bar none. Much larger than Obama, certainly larger than someone like Bush or Clinton, past Reagan levels. I don't think there's ever been another president, at least in a partisan sense, that's had that much hardened support. That shows one of his character, you could say, flaws if you're a Democrat, certainly, or positives if you're a partisan Republican. He has that in-party charisma. His ability to sell himself to moderates, so-called, or centrists, so-called, nonpartisan, independent voters like myself is a little bit more limited. But it won't be once there's a Democrat he's running against, because that Democrat's going to say crazy shit. If you look at the platforms of the Democrats that could be his opponent, every single one of them is a raging lunatic. Trump seems normal. He's been normalized by the fact that, number one, he's been in office for several years. Well, that's normal. Number two, he's taken hold of the paradigm and dragged it into his corner and toyed around with it. Number two, he's become the Twitter president. That's been normalized. None of these other people are playing his game, but they have to. Literally, in order to beat Trump, they have to beat Trump at his own game at this point. I don't think any of them are skilled enough to do it. The only ones that could possibly hold a candle to him aren't being taken seriously. They're downfield candidates. Certainly it's not Biden. It's not Elizabeth Warren. It's not Bernie Sanders or any of these people. It's not a Kamala. Probably the only potentially viable one would be Buttigieg. The problem is, even he's a standard Democrat. He looks a little bit Jimmy Carter-esque when he talks about religion. He's the gay pro-Jesus Democrat. It's the funniest thing that I've ever seen. There's a reason he's not being taken seriously by the clown car Democrats. And he's the sane one. He and Joe Biden. The sane man of your party is a man who becomes incoherent, can't follow through on one or two sentences, might stroke out anytime, has had several aneurysms, has a Me Too problem, certainly, with his optics. That's the sane man of the Democratic field right now. That's a big problem. So yeah, Trump's approval numbers, they're the result of a dysfunctional Democratic Party. Also, a good economy, I would throw in there as an afterthought. The economy's doing well and we're not in a major war, so there's no reason for anyone to just shriek about the sky falling. The Democrats also, in closing, have arguably overplayed their hand. They've relied upon people's fear in order to combat Trump. There's not a whole lot to be afraid of, though, when the economy is churning on ahead. We had better than expected jobs report, unemployment ticked down again. Dow Jones is up. Diplomacy, it's generally speaking, around the world we're doing fine. There's no major problem for the Democrats to actually seize upon, and so what's happened is that they're seizing upon ghosts, upon illusions. The impeachment proceedings are based on a fake scandal. It has nothing to do with reality. It is literally Mueller probe 2.0. The American people have become, I think, tired of it at this point, and unless you're already a partisan Democrat or a never-Trumper, you probably don't take the impeachment proceedings seriously. Majority of Americans support the idea of the inquiry. The majority of Americans don't support actual impeachment. Those are two totally different things. Go ahead and inquire all you want. That approval will drop like a rock when it becomes clear that it's based on absolutely nothing. You got some activistic courts and people like Adam Schiff taking the fore. That's not great optics either. Schiff is the last person the Democrats should be putting in as the face of their party. He's arguably worse to have as a figurehead, as a mascot, basically, than Elon Omar or AOC could ever be. That's about all. Peace out.